Chapter 5. Bubba stared at the single-level house that belonged to his parents. He had only spent a few years in this house, as they had moved to Woodville when he was in high school. But for a time, at least, it had been home. Now it felt like someone else's life. He hadn't been in this house for nearly 5 years, and he'd had no contact with his family since then either. What would they say? Would they hate him? His nerves twisted and knotted in his stomach, creating the feeling of having swallowed a lead weight. "Should I come in with you?" Makenna asked, touching his arm. The gentle feel of her hand focused Bubba, and he nodded. "That would be nice. There are parts I can't explain, but will your family mind you being out so late?" A look of regret passed briefly over Makenna's face. "No one is waiting up for me except my cat, Tabitha." Bubba knew that feeling. He'd tried dating a few women when he first moved to Fire Beach, but he could never completely relax. A sense of guilt about the women who had been murdered still plagued him, even though he knew it wasn't his fault. Still, they had been killed simply because they knew him. That was hard to get over. Plus, deep down inside, a part of him feared it would happen again. If he found someone and opened up about his past, it had just been easier to keep a distance and pretend he didn't need the company or the companionship, even though he did. Perhaps Makenna was the same way. She'd definitely been devoted and eager when he'd met her 5 years ago. Maybe she too dealt with the guilt of never catching the arsonist. Or maybe her job was her life. To make captain as quickly as she had meant she was dedicated to her work. Perhaps there was no time for a man in her life. He didn't know why that thought pulled at his heart. "Okay, let's do this then." With a final deep breath, Bubba opened his door and stepped out of the police cruiser. Makenna fell into step beside him as they walked up the concrete path to the front door. His finger was almost on the bell when Makenna's hand stilled his arm. "Wait, Bubba, I should tell you that your death hit your parents hard. They've aged faster than they might have otherwise, I think." Her eyes brimmed with apologies. "I just thought you should be prepared." Her words broke his heart, but Bubba had known the ruse would be hard on his parents. He was the oldest, their firstborn, and no parent should ever have to bury their child, no matter how old. He had argued about it with Makenna on the night of the escape. "I think we need to pretend you were killed, and you need to leave town," Makenna said as she paced her living room. Matt shot up from the couch and threw his hands in the air. "Are you kidding me? I have a life here. My family is here." "That's exactly my point." She turned and closed the distance between them. "I thought you were the arsonist because all the women were connected to you. But now I think you may have been the target all along. I think the arsonist was choosing women he thought you cared about. And when that didn't faze you, he targeted you. If we let him believe you're dead, then maybe this will end. But if he knows you're still alive, who will he target next? Felicity? Your mother? Your father? Do you really want their lives on your head?" Matt stared into her eyes. Of course he didn't want to see his parents hurt, or his foster sister. But was this really the only way? "You really think the killings will stop if he thinks I'm dead?" She was asking him to give up everything. His life, his family, his job, everything he had worked so hard for. But if it meant the killings stopped, he had to do it, didn't he? "I don't know, but my gut says yes. Look, let's get you out of town and continue the charade. If the killings continue, I'll bring you back and explain to your family. But if they don't continue, if they end, then you'll know it was about hurting me all along," Bubba finished. Why anyone would want to hurt him was beyond comprehension. He was a fireman. He saved lives. He attended church and volunteered. He donated to charities. Why would anyone want to hurt him? He searched his memory for any altercation, any event that might have been misconstrued enough to set someone off, but he came up with nothing. "I'm sorry, Matt. I know this is a lot to ask, but I think it's the only way." And she'd been right. The killings had stopped, for 5 years. For 5 years, the people of Woodville had been safe. His family had been safe. But now that safety was crumbling yet again, and every bone in his body wanted to catch this guy, to stop him, to make him pay for the 5 years he had stolen from him. He took a deep breath and then pressed the bell. The familiar melody echoed through the house, and a moment later a soft shuffling sound carried forth. The lock clicked, followed by a creak as the door opened, and then Bubba saw his mother's face for the first time in 5 years. She did appear older. New lines had sprouted near her eyes and across her forehead, and her hair, once streaked with gray, was now completely devoid of color. But her eyes were the same deep pools of chocolate that he'd grown up seeing, the ones that oozed concern with every skin knee and exuded love every time she kissed his forehead. They were filled with a resigned sadness now, but the light he remembered emerged as she recognized his face. "Matt?" One hand flew to her mouth as the other gripped the door more tightly to keep her steady. "Hi, Mom," he said, hoping she wouldn't pass out. He wasn't sure he'd make it through the door in time to catch her. "Matt?" She let go of the door, and then her hands were on his chest, his arms, his face, patting him as if to make sure he was real and not an apparition. "It's really you?" "It's really me, Mom." Emotion choked his voice and tears stung his eyes, but it didn't matter. His mother threw her arms around him and he returned the hug, relishing the warmth of family for the first time in half a decade. "Margaret, who is it?" His father's voice carried in from the living room, and the familiar tones sent a flood of memories washing over Bubba. "You better come see for yourself." His mother's voice was quiet, but it held a note of authority, and moments later his father appeared in the doorway. He too had aged, but the effects were not quite as dramatic. His hair was grayer, but he still stood straight and displayed the confidence in his posture that the military had taught him so long ago. "Hi, Dad." His mother still clung to him, but he stood taller than she did and could see over her head. "Matt? Is that you?" His father's eyes roamed his face as if he couldn't believe it, and then they turned to Makenna. "What is this? Is this your idea of some sick game?" Bubba flinched at the sharp edge in his father's voice. "If you'll let us come inside, I'll explain everything," Makenna said beside him. Though her exterior appeared brave, Bubba could see that his father's words had shaken her normal stoic face. A slight tremble hovered in her voice. "Let's let them in, Patrick," his mother said, and though she did not let go of Bubba entirely, she shifted so that her arm remained firmly around him, but she could see his father. His father hesitated, but then he stepped back, and Makenna and Bubba entered the living room. Waves of nostalgia washed over him as he took in the faded couch and the well-worn recliner where his father always drank his morning coffee. A painting his brother had made in high school still sat over the couch, and even the color of the walls was the same. It was like time had stood still in this living room, and Bubba wondered if they might be able to pick up where they left off. "I'm going to call Felicity and see if she wants to come over," Margaret said as she motioned everyone to sit down. "She'll be so happy. She's had a rough week, but this might be just the thing to cheer her up." "What do you mean a rough week?" Makenna asked. Though it was rare for an arsonist to be a woman, she was counting no one out. And as the murders had just started, anyone who'd had anything upsetting in the last month was a suspect in her book. "She and her boyfriend broke up. They'd been together for years. She's pretty torn up about it, but she'll be so glad to know you're not dead." For a moment, she paused as if afraid Bubba might disappear if she wasn't touching him, but then she pulled out her cell phone and dialed. Makenna sized up her options as everyone sat down. Patrick sat on the couch, and Bubba took the recliner, which left standing or sitting in the other chair. She didn't want to stay long and interrupt their family reunion, but standing seemed rude. "Felicity, Matt is alive. He's here right now. You must come over and see him." She paused while she listened to the voice on the other end, and then her smile faltered. "But can't that wait until later?" Makenna watched Margaret's reaction. Had his sister really declined coming to see the brother she thought was dead? That seemed odd to her. Had it been her brother, she would have dropped everything to come see him. Okay, I'll tell him. See you later. Margaret hung up the phone and stared at it a moment. She said she had some work she couldn't leave tonight, but she'll come see you tomorrow, Matt. He flashed her a sympathetic smile. It's fine, Mom. She nodded, but she didn't appear convinced. I'll call Jacob and Rachel. I know they don't live here anymore, but they'll want to know. Bubba stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. Mom, why don't you let Makenna explain first, and then we can call anyone you want, okay? She nodded and allowed herself to be led to the couch. Bubba squeezed her shoulder and then returned to the recliner. Makenna took a deep breath as she stared at Patrick and Margaret staring back at her. Flashbacks of the night she had come to tell them Matt was dead filled her mind, and she had to blink to dispel them. 5 years ago, I sat here and told you that Matt had been killed in a house fire, she began. But that wasn't the truth. You lied to us? Patrick exploded, jumping up from the couch. I'll have your badge for this. Please, Dad, hear her out. Bubba motioned for his father to sit back down. She shot him a grateful look and then continued. When the fires first started, the only clues we had pointed to Matt being involved. He knew all the women, and he had knowledge of how to start fires. But then the killer went after Matt. He escaped that night and came to me. I realized then that Matt might have been the target all along. The killer chose the women he did in order to hurt Matt, and when that wasn't working, he went after Matt himself. I asked Matt to continue the charade, that he had died. I knew that if the killing stopped, my assumption would be right. It meant Matt would have to stay dead to all of us, but it would keep you safe. If the killings had continued, I would have told you his death was a lie, and he could have returned home. I hated not being able to say goodbye, Bubba said, but if it meant keeping you both safe, it was worth it. A tear escaped Margaret's face, and she crossed the room to where Bubba was sitting. Oh, my baby, that must have been so hard on you. Makenna looked away from the touching scene. This was her fault. Her decision had torn this family apart 5 years ago, and those were years they would never get back. She'd have to live with the consequences of that decision for the rest of her life. I assume you've brought him back because of the recent murder, Patrick said from the couch. His crossed arms and passive face hid his emotions, and Makenna wondered what he was thinking. Yes, sir. The other night, a man was killed in a house fire. I believe it is the same guy, even though we aren't sure why he is attacking men now instead of women. My hope is that when the killer finds out he didn't kill Matt after all, that he'll mess up and give us some clue. So you're using my son as a pawn, once again. Dad, Bubba cut in. She's not using me. She asked and I agreed. Besides, it allowed me to see you guys again. I don't like it, his father said. She was wrong the first time. What if she's wrong this time too? But you really do get hurt. Dad, you know I can't just sit around knowing people are being killed. I have to at least try to help. You always were like that, Margaret said, stroking Bubba's hair. I remember you used to always bring home stray animals to save them. Do you remember that? I do, Mother. Bubba appeared embarrassed by the hint of his childhood, and Makenna took that as her cue to let them catch up. Well, it's getting late, and I have a feeling you'd all like to catch up. She turned to Bubba. How about I swing by around 9 in the morning and pick you up? I'd like you to go with me to interview some of the friends and employees of our victim. That sounds great. I'll see you then, Captain Drake. Makenna stood and walked through the uncomfortable fog that filled the room. She might have reunited the family, but she'd also been the one who tore them apart. Nothing could change that, and she knew it would be a choice that would haunt her forever. Was this why she had avoided having a family of her own? Was she so jaded from watching families grieve that she unconsciously pushed men away? Or was it simply her job? Even though they didn't have a lot of crime, her workload had increased dramatically with each promotion, and now as captain, she spent most of her time at work. Yes, that was probably it. There was no time for a family, or even a man in her life, as long as she stayed in her current position, which left the question, was it time for a change?